Imagine a time when the line between the sacred and the profane was finer than the edge of a dagger. A time when, beneath the Gothic arches of silent cathedrals, whispers threaded through dark corridors, speaking of nocturnal creatures that were not enemies of the cross, but allies. And what if I told you that, in the shadows of the Inquisition and the monasteries, the Church had resorted to cursed beings to combat an even older and more insidious evil: vampires. Not as depicted in folk, legends or modern romances, but creatures bound by arcane pacts, driven not only by a thirst for blood, but by a purpose imposed by crucifixes and psalms. These entities, damned to eternity, were summoned and controlled by secret orders within the Church itself. Orders that saw in vampires the perfect weapon against the demons corrupting the earthly realm. Why would a bastion of light ally itself with the living symbol of damnation? Because there were enemies even exorcists dared not face. Entities so rooted in the flesh of the world that they demanded something equally dark for their destruction. In forgotten crypts and forbidden libraries lie fragmented accounts of the Sanguinati Dei, the children of the night redeemed by sacred vows. Immortal warriors at the service of the faith. In this video, we will descend into the darkest dungeons of history and explore the remnants of this profane alliance. A truth hidden for centuries under veils of silence, fear, and fire. Prepare to uncover the secret the Church will never admit. When the angels failed, she called the monsters. Across the centuries, the Catholic Church built its image as defender of divine light against the forces of hell. But beneath the golden glow of stained glass and the celestial strains of Gregorian chant, another reality lay hidden, a dirty, desperate, invisible war. While priests and monks battled with prayers, relics, and holy water, there were moments when evil took form so primitive and ancient that the purity of the saints was powerless. And it was in those moments that the Church faced an unthinkable question. How far could one go in the name of good? In the dark archives of the Vatican, with shelves barred even to cardinals, rest fragments of a forgotten chapter in the history of faith. Texts of secret orders, seals of dried blood, and inquisitors' diaries that speak with caution and revulsion of the summoning of the children of the night. The term was carefully recorded, never vampires, for that word carried stigma and mass panic. The ecclesiastical designation was anathema domini, and its existence was tolerated only under extreme conditions. These beings, said to have arisen from cursed pre-Christian bloodlines, were not merely damned, they were instruments. In moments of spiritual collapse, the Church turned to these tools under precise protocols: confinement, containment rituals, and above all, control through sacred relics. It is said that one such creature, bound by chains forged from nails, of the true cross, was kept in a crypt beneath an abbey in the Apennine Mountains. There, fed on the blood of the condemned and kept under constant vigil by silent monks, it was released only when a possession proved unmanageable by traditional means. But the relationship between faith and monstrosity was no novelty. Since the time of the Crusades, apocryphal accounts mention night warriors appearing in the most desperate moments, able to traverse battlefields steeped in blasphemy and heresy, ignoring demonic temptations as one walks through a mist. In some letters preserved by monastic orders, there are mentions of the Lamia Christi, a pale, silent female figure whose presence hushed violent possessions and caused the bodies of the possessed to burn in tears and blood at her mere touch. The Church never officially acknowledged such practice. It hid it beneath layers of dogma and punished those who dared to mention it. The very word, heresy, served as a shield to obscure these alliances. Yet among the oldest inquisitors, among the penitent monks who spent their lives in silence and darkness, these whispers endured. And in those whispers, a terrifying truth emerged. The vampires did not merely serve the church, they made demands. Pacts were sealed with double blood, of faith and of the night. The paradox was inevitable. The faith preaching redemption and purity was, in the shadows, employing forces eternally condemned. There was no confession for these deeds, for to confess would be to admit that the sacred structure itself had bowed to the abyss. Thus were born clandestine orders such as the Sibilantes of Damascus and the Keepers of the Seal, monks and nuns devoted exclusively to maintaining and monitoring these shadow agents. They lived in nameless monasteries, their maps burned and their stories told only in coded chants. And most disturbing of all, many of these vampires were not discovered but created. Evidence suggests that the church, with access to forbidden texts of the Kabbalah, Persian alchemy, and Babylonian grimoires, developed specific methods to transform humans, always heretics, murderers, or the condemned, into instruments of spiritual warfare. The process was agonizing, violent, and concluded with a reverse baptism using black oil and inverted prayers. The resultant creature was chained in subterranean sanctuaries until needed. This reality coexisted with the church's public face for centuries. Men who celebrated Mass by morning supervised the awakening of beasts by night. And so, under the sign of the cross, emerged an alliance that contradicted everything the faith professed, but which, to a select few, was absolutely necessary. The myth of the vampire as a cursed creature and enemy of faith is a construct deeply rooted in the collective imagination. Yet the origins of the so-called vampire hunters involve a darker alchemy, where the curse was meticulously shaped to serve sacred purposes. They were not mere aberrations of the night. They were ritual creations, forged between sin and penance, between pain and doctrine. The making of a vampire hunter was no supernatural accident. It was a deliberate process, each step enveloped in esoteric liturgies adapted by heretical Christian sects, blending biblical verses with fragments of Gnostic texts and Arabic grimoires. The starting point was always a host, a condemned human, marked by unforgivable crimes, chosen not only for their wickedness, but for their spiritual resilience. It was believed that the more torn the soul, the greater the space for the reverse purification ritual to mold a new entity. These rituals began in underground chambers called the Crypt of the Inverted Mirror, where light was forbidden. There, the condemned was bathed in a mixture of black wine and ashes of martyred relics, blasphemously profaned to forge a link between the sacred and the impure. For 3 days, the body lay in trance, subjected to continuous recitations of the Psalms in reverse, while trained ravens circled the chamber as symbols of dual vision, to see the divine and the profane simultaneously. The moment of transfiguration was the most perilous. A consecrated priest, yet an initiate of night's mysteries, performed the kiss of blood. A cut was made on the officiant's own hand, whose blood dripped into the mouth of the condemned, as he intoned an invocation known only as verbum tenebrae. In that instant, the victim's eyes darkened, the heart ceased, and something ancient awoke. But the pact did not end there. The new vampire, now reborn as a hunter, was sealed with the seal of Lazarus, a silver stake inscribed with Kabbalistic symbols driven into the chest, which did not kill but kept him under control. This stake served as a divine key. Without it, the monster succumbed to blind thirst and became unmanageable. Only the senior members of the secret order overseeing the hunters knew how to safely remove the seal and unleash the creature for its mission. The vampire hunters were then conditioned for their functional existence. Deprived of sunlight, but not of reason, they were trained in rituals of spiritual discernment. They learned to detect demonic possession, to scent the presence of malignant entities even through walls and veils. Some developed near-prophetic gifts, feverish dreams in which they foresaw occult cults and future invocations. Others lost speech entirely and communicated solely in symbolic script, using dead alphabets such as Syriac and Etruscan. Despite their inhuman nature, there was an attempt to bind them to the idea of penance. Every hunter was forced to bear crucifixes driven into their flesh, not as symbols of faith, but as reminders of the church's control over their existence. Some had their eyes sewn shut, guided only by the sound of blasphemy. Others endured years of fasting, feeding only when a new demon was destroyed, in a cycle of abstinence and blood. Their tasks were among the darkest: infiltration of demonic covens, destruction of impure relics, persecution of heretics wielding necromancy as a weapon. The most famed of these creatures, recorded in codified letters of the 12th century, was called Valax. Described as a hooded figure with translucent skin, glassy eyes, and a voice that induced hallucinations, Valax was sent to Marseille to annihilate a sect that used children as hosts for infernal entities. The massacre was silent, bodies found in perfect circles, bearing signs of internal burning, and eyes rolled back in ecstasy. But every mission exacted a price. With each assignment, the hunters lost a fragment of their remaining humanity. The church knew this, and thus kept them isolated between missions, guarded by deaf-mute monks and chanters whose sole duty was to maintain unceasing containment chants. At any hint of rebellion or loss of control, the vampires were punished with eternal silence. Buried alive in consecrated stone tombs, left conscious yet immobile for eternity. When the creature created begins to question its creator, the most primal instinct is denial. And it was precisely this instinct that guided the church upon realizing the vampire hunters, once submissive and silent, were turning into dangerous unknowns. No longer instruments, but consciences. No longer obedient beasts, but arbiters of human sin. It was the dawn of the Purge. This process, begun between the 16th and 17th centuries, was meticulously orchestrated by internal orders specialized in record concealment and destruction. One such order, known as the Ordo Judici, had the exclusive mission of identifying hunters still active or confined and eliminating them permanently. Each operation was accompanied by purification rituals, followed by absolute silence. Dead monks burned archives, vanished witnesses. Entire crypts were sealed forever, not with ordinary stone but with salt mixed with the blood of martyred relics. Manuscripts detailing vampiric creation rituals were torn and buried beneath newly consecrated churches, hoping the sacred would smother the profane. Statues were carved over the confinement sites, showing saints with distorted features, a symbolic attempt to redeem buried horrors. But not all hunters were imprisoned. Some had blended into society under false identities, observing, waiting. And when they began to disappear, peasant law spoke of men who do not bleed, eyes of glass, the monk who walks backward. Villagers sensed something being erased, but did not know what. Within, the church faced a moral and theological dilemma. By destroying the vampires, it was also erasing centuries of hidden victories against unspeakable demons. It was, deep down, destroying a part of itself. Many clerics went mad during the purge, tormented by nightmares and visions, as if the creatures they had sworn to command now demanded payment for betrayal. The last documented execution of a hunter took place in 1732 in an underground monastery near Vienna. The vampire, chained for over 80 years, had entered a conscious hibernation. When inquisitors pierced him with sacred spears, his body did not disintegrate. It remained intact, wearing a faint smile, as though he had foreseen everything and accepted it. The next day, the entire monastery was consumed by an inexplicable fire. Over time, the Church succeeded in erasing almost all traces of the profane alliance. Today, few know of these chapters. Those who do carry the secret as a burden or a curse. But there are rumors that on certain nights, hooded figures still visit forgotten cemeteries, murmur forbidden chants, and leave offerings where the hunters fell. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Or perhaps precaution. In the dark corridors of history, where truth was buried under layers of dogma and silence, the pact between the Church and the vampire hunters remains one of the most disturbing alliances ever forged in the name of good. There is no official mention, no sermon to acknowledge it. But its traces endure, in moss-covered ruins, in interdicted chronicles, in whispers that persist on nights when even faith fears to speak. These hunters were created to destroy evil, but paid the highest price. They lost their souls, their identities, their very histories. They became shadows wielded by light, monsters in service of salvation. And when they ceased to serve, they were hunted as though they had never existed. The very institution that spawned them was forced to confront the darkest reflection of its faith and chose to erase it. Yet perhaps the most unsettling aspect is not the existence of these beings, but what it reveals about us. How far are we willing to go to vanquish evil? What monsters are we ready to forge and deploy to protect what we deem sacred? And when evil hides within the sanctuary itself, who dares to hunt it? Perhaps there are still slumbering hunters, waiting for the day the world will again need their claws. Or perhaps their whispers, now mere legend, continue to echo in the faith's dungeons, reminding us that not all light is pure and not all shadow is evil. If you enjoyed this story, leave your comment, share with those who love a good dark mystery, and subscribe for more tales from the hidden side of faith, until our next descent into the shadows of history.